Now we head up to the brain. So looking at the central nervous system and how it is that the brain in particular works to be able to take in information from these 4 different types of receptors. The human nervous system can be divided into these 2 parts, the central, or CNS, and the peripheral, PNS. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord, whereas the peripheral nervous system is all of the sensors and all of the nerves that connect those sensors back to the central nervous system. There's going to be a general pathway by which the information is coming in from those sensors, passed through afferent neurons, processed within the CNS, usually some combination of the brain and spinal cord, and then messages are sent out through efferent neurons to be able to coordinate a response. Sometimes it's automated through your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems to be able to do things like release hormones. And other times it's going to send out messages to your motor system, a voluntary response where you're going to move in response to a certain stimuli. I'm going to focus now largely on the brain, but one exception to processing within the brain is going to be a reflex. In a reflex, you're going to have a message that is sent in from a sensory neuron that's going to come in to a series of cells that are found within the spinal cord. That spinal cord is then going to receiving that sensory information will send out via a motor neuron a response, usually because it's a life-threatening situation. For example, a loud noise causing you to blink, or the movement of your head when an object is thrown at your face. These are things that require extremely fast responses, and so any delay of that response in the brain is something that could end up causing further damage. So therefore, these reflexes by nature bypass the brain and coordinate a response via the spinal cord. So let's start now with the structure of the brain. So your brain consists of neurons. Ultimately, you have 2 major types of cells, glial cells and then the neurons themselves, that are built upon each other and coordinate with each other to be able to help this processing of information. You can see pictured here a glial cell and how it is attached and has this kind of spiral shape spreading out in all directions. Here you can see a neuron that has been highlighted here in orange, and you can see how you have the cell body and all of the many different branching axons that extend out and communicate to other cells. Here you can see an electron micrograph showing those many connections of those axial branches within the structure of the cerebral cortex, and this rainbow showing a staining of different types of neurons, highlighting the many different connections that are made between them. So finally here we can see the relationship between, again, those glial cells, which act as kind of a support and are providing necessary nutrients and help to maintain the proper functioning of neurons within the central nervous system. Those neurons, sometimes they connect out and are sent out through the PNS. And so you can see, although the axons are not covered with myelin in the CNS, they are covered with myelin in the PNS because of the long distance that those axon branches have to travel. So within the brain is going to be divided into 2 different types based upon the color when you look at the brain tissue itself. You have gray matter, which consists of the cell bodies and the terminals of those neurons as the dendrites, versus the white matter, which is the axons. So the neurons are kind of beginning in this area along the outside of the brain, and this outer part, particularly the cortex, is highly folded, and that's a topic we'll come back to in a moment. Then those cells are then sending out branches through the white matter to be able to communicate with other neurons in other parts of the brain. You can see these cell bodies present in the gray matter, which is present here in the center and the left, versus the white matter, which you can see present on the right. There are interesting comparisons that can be made between the human brain and the brain of other species. Interestingly, the brain of a developing embryo looks extremely similar when you look at the human embryo versus that of other animal species. However, it is the changes that happen over time as a human embryo is developing into a fetus and growing to full term. It is the development in particular of the cerebrum that really distinguishes the human brain from that of other animals. Modern neuroscience has taught us that the brain is subdivided into specific sections, with each section being largely responsible for a smaller subset of functions. There are many famous patients who had damage to a particular part of the brain, and that damage led to changes not in all cognitive functions, but just in certain aspects of them. And so, as we've gone on, we've found, for example, that the brainstem is going to be important for being able to coordinate the autonomic nervous system. It sends messages, for example, to the heart, influencing the heart to be able to speed up or slow down depending upon body conditions. The brainstem is sometimes still active even if other parts of the brain have shut down. So, for example, someone who has had some type of traumatic brain injury, we will shine lights in their eyes, even if they are unconscious, because if the brainstem is still active, then when you shine that bright light into their eye, the pupil will still contract in response to that stimuli. Moving back, the cerebellum is going to be responsible mostly for balance and coordination, amongst other functions, but this is one that you should be familiar with. It's going to do things like coordinate the contraction of muscles at specific times to allow for smoother, more coordinated movement. There are a lot of muscles that need to contract for you to run or to dance. And so those muscles the nerves need to fire at very specific times to ensure that muscle contraction happens in the proper order in the proper parts of the body. Now, these lower parts of the brain are actually very, very similar between humans and other animal species. It's when we move up to the cerebrum, the seat of higher order functions, that we actually start to see some of those differences. And we'll get to some of the specific functions of the brain in a moment. The left and right part of your cerebrum are known as the hemispheres. These left and right hemispheres of the brain communicate very strongly and actively with each other, but yet they do have some unique features on one side versus the other that you will be familiar with. Here you can see in the sheep brain, which is being, the two cerebral hemispheres are being gently pulled apart, revealing a cluster of nerve bundles known as the corpus callosum. And these communicate messages back and forth between the left and right hemispheres. You can see then the cerebellum present here at the bottom and the spinal cord extending down below. The brainstem in this particular picture is hidden from view. Now, the cerebrum is then subdivided into different sections which have some different functions. We have a lot of decision making, planning, some of those cognitive functions that are going to be really active when you're learning and in school. Those are going to be found in the frontal lobe. You have the Broca's area, which is responsible for forming speech. Again, this is one of those areas that was very pivotal in our understanding of the division of functions within the brain. You have the motor cortex, which extends across the center of the cerebrum, moving over the crown, extending across both the left and right hemispheres. You have touch. You have the visual cortex and the occipital lobe in the very back of the cerebrum. And all of those sections are going to be coordinating with each other and sending messages down to the lower parts of the brain and out to your peripheral nervous system. Now, the somatosensory and motor cortexes are going to route information to and from different regions of the body. If you look at this cross-section of the brain, there's going to be certain neurons which are processing information and sending out information to different parts of the body. For example, you can see that there is a large number of neurons which are going to be devoted to receiving and sending information to your hands because of the large number of mechanoreceptors that are present there and the fine motor skills, all the different tiny muscles in there that are doing work. Similarly, you have a lot of sensory information coming in from the head, from the lips, the nose, the eyes, the mouth. And so there are a large number of neurons that are responsible for receiving and then sending information to those parts of the body. Now, as we look again in that comparison between a human versus other species, using a bird brain as an example, a big difference is going to be the folding. Not just the size, but the folding of the cerebral cortex. So certainly, in terms of just size and weight, the human is going to have a much larger brain as a whole, and the cortex is going to take up a larger proportion. So percentage-wise, it's going to be a bigger part of the brain. But it's not really only its size that is significant to be able to understand the difference in terms of the kind of the brain power of the cortex of a human, but rather it's all of the folds. The exterior of the human brain, of the cortex, is very, very wrinkly, and all of those wrinkles help to increase surface area. And because neurons, the cell bodies themselves, are located on the exterior part of the cortex, the more wrinkled the cortex is, the more folds that it has, then the more neurons that can be packed in there, and therefore receive and send and process more information. In comparison, the cerebrum of the bird brain is going to be much more smooth. So it will be able to hold less neurons, and there will be less connections between those neurons. Now, brain mass and body size is going to be shown here on a logarithmic scale, with the black line representing the trend up and to the right, that we can see that as the brain gets bigger, body weight also increases. So grams of brain weight over kilograms of body weight. And so that line, it shows the fairly consistent relationship. Bigger animals will have bigger brains. However, not all animals are going to lie directly on that line. You're going to see some extremely large animals. So we look at the whales, the hippopotamus. Those are animals where they have such large bodies, and while they do have big brains, their brains don't take up as big a proportion of their body mass as other things like the cat or the dog will. As you look, anything that is above that black line is going to be animals that have a proportionally larger brain compared to their body size. So on the furthest exterior here, you see man. So the brain of a person is going to be much further above that trend line, meaning that compared to other animals, a person is going to have a relatively large brain considering its body size. We're not the only one there on the exterior there, so you can see the dolphin, the mouse are both further above that line in comparison to other species. So this alone does the size of our brain alone doesn't explain why it is that we have these additional cognitive functions. But if we look at the size of our brain along with the folding of the brain together, that really does explain how it is that we are different. One other interesting twist on lateralization of the brain. Information that comes in is going to be processed by the opposite hemisphere from which it came in. So if I hear something from my left ear, that information is going to be sent via the auditory nerve to the auditory processing center in my right hemisphere. Likewise, if I hear something from my right ear, that information is sent to my left hemisphere. If I want my right hand to move to be able to pick up an object, then that information is sent from the left hemisphere, from my left motor cortex, out to the muscles that are in my right hand. Now, one little complication when we look at vision, that same concept happens, but it's not right eye versus left eye. Rather, how that information is routed is that anything that is in your right visual field, so if you extend a line out, anything that is to my right, no matter which eye I'm looking through, that information is going to stimulate neurons on the left side of either eye, and then send that information then to the left visual cortex. Anything that's on my left visual field, that information, no matter which eye receives that, will be sent to the right visual cortex. And so it's that part of the brain that will receive that information initially, and then by communicating across the corpus callosum, your brain will process and produce an image that incorporates both of those visual fields.